on 106.5 FM and online. It's the After 5 guest with Wynne Thomas.
And time for my After 5 guest today. And on October 11th, 1957, Hollywood star Marlon Brando married Miss Anna Kashfi, 23-year-old Indian princess from Darjeeling, but also from Cardiff. My After 5 guest today is Sarah Broughton, author of Brando's Bride. How are you, Sarah? Okay?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
So what put you on the trail of this book?
I came across a story, maybe about 10, 15 years ago, when I came across the idea that Anna had left Cardiff. There was a Welsh girl, essentially, who had married Marlon Brando just after he won the Oscar for On the Waterfront, and I just got to thinking, like, how could that possibly happen? How could you leave post-war Cardiff and meet and marry Marlon Brando? So that's kind of what set me on the trail to find out, how she did that, really.
So did Brando take it seriously, the marriage?
I think he did. I mean, his line on it was, he said to one of his close friends, I've always wanted a baby, because, of course, she was pregnant when they got married. And he said, I'll give the marriage a year, but I really want a child. So I think he loved her, but I think it was already a volatile relationship by the time that they got married. So I think it was it always had an air of doom about it, really.
The reason I kind of ask you that, Sarah, is that the morning before the wedding, it says in the book, he was caught in bed with another woman.
Yeah, I got that information from a memoir of him, the woman who was his kind of personal assistant at the time, who said that she used to go to his house every morning, to work for him, and that was the first she knew he was getting married. When he got out of bed, the woman was still in bed, and he said, "Oh, by the way, I'm getting married today." And off he popped to his aunt's house to marry Anna Kashfi.
But then the cat was kind of out of the bag when Joan and William O'Callaghan explained that Anna was their daughter based in Cardiff.
Yes, that was unfortunate to say the least for Anna, I think, just coming, literally the day after she'd married him, and all the papers had initially reported Brando marries Indian starlets, and then the O'Callaghan's came forward and said that's not her real name, she's Joan O'Callaghan, and she worked in a butcher shop in Cardiff. They kind of scuppered, really, her hopes and dreams at that point.
So where were her parents from, Sarah?
They were both born in India, although they told the press at the time that they were both born in London and had met and married in London and had only gone to India for William's job. I traced their family trees and saw their baptism certificates, and which is the Indian equivalent, and they were both definitely born in India, as was Anna herself, who was born in Calcutta.
So was O'Callaghan the real name then?
Yeah, that was William's real name, and he definitely was her father, and an awful lot of the Irish went to, in fact, my great whatever was originally an Irishman who went to India, and I think that's almost definitely how the O'Callaghans originally ended up there. A lot of Irish went over to work for the East India Company as soldiers, basically.
So, but then she fabricated her parents, didn't she? Who is this gentleman, Devi Kashfi?
Devi Kashfi.
Yeah, who's that?
That is an entirely fabricated name. There's no trace of him being a real person. What's quite interesting is that the name she gave for her mother, and bearing in mind that she'd done her wedding certificate for Marlon 2 weeks before they actually got married, so they went and got their wedding license, and on that license she put that her mother was called Selma Ghosh, and Selma Ghosh was the woman who ran a scarf shop in Piccadilly Circus that she worked for, and Devi Kashfi, and obviously she'd taken the name Kashfi, but Devi, who knows where she got that from, completely made up name, and there actually is no trace of a man, certainly not her father, ever being called that or existing. Did
you get to the bottom of why this kind of deception was in place with her?
Well, to be fair to her, almost everybody in the film industry, the actors and actresses, almost all of them took other names. So, famously, John Wayne had a different name. His real name was first name was Marion, which didn't really sit very well as a kind of cowboy. Kirk Douglas had a different name. It was a really, really common thing. Joan Crawford's real name was Lucille LeSueur, which sounds much more like a film star than Joan Crawford, but they renamed her Joan Crawford. They used to pick names to fit the images of the actors or the stars that they were building. So that was really common that she did that. And I think she just basically, she moved to America and reinvented herself and kept that, that was the name that she lived by there. And I think it just didn't cross her mind that whole story would break and she would be exposed in that way.
So was that Hollywood of the 50s then when they had to invent all this stuff?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was the star system, which was kind of really got going in the late 1920s, was very, very dominant in Hollywood during the 30s and 40s and 50s, and kind of died out really during the 60s. But that whole star system where the studios ran everything and were all powerful. And of course, so many people went to the cinema in those days. People were going to the cinema 3, 4, 5 times a week because there was no television. So that was their main source of entertainment. And so movie stars were absolutely huge at that time, huge.
But then it must have changed later on. I mean, Richard Burton never denied he was from Pontryfen, and Anthony Hopkins never denied he was from Port Talbot. So things must have changed in the 60s afterwards.
I think so. I mean, the studios started to go into a decline then, and really the whole, the stars themselves became more powerful, and they set up their own companies, and there was this dominance of, all the studios that are really famous ones like MGM and Warner Brothers. There were five key studios, and basically their sort of stranglehold on the industry ended really, and other things came in, and of course that was mostly the main cause of that was television, and television became their great rival, and so that caused them huge problems really. So they could no longer dominate and run things exactly as they'd always wanted to.
So this character Bosco, was that her real brother?
Yes, and yeah, no, it absolutely definitely was. I tried to trace him, but unfortunately he'd passed away a couple of years before I got in touch. But I did hear back from his widow, and I understand there are surviving children, I think. So, but because his widow had asked me not to, she said Bosco. It was a very upsetting time in the family's life, and Bosco had chosen never to speak of it, so she didn't feel comfortable, and I obviously completely respected that. So I haven't gone down that part of the family history at all in that way. But that absolutely definitely was her full brother, not her half brother, as she later claimed, and that was his real name, Bosco O'Callaghan.
Right, I see. So they came from India back to Wales. Anglo-Indian life in pre-independent India, what is it like?
Well, they were had a kind of privileged life in a lot of ways, because they were trusted by the British to take on the jobs, like obviously the railways came about in the kind of 1870s, 1880s, and they were given the kind of the prominent jobs in the railways. So they weren't British, so they weren't given the absolute top jobs, but they also were trusted more because they were half British. That was the whole point of them. That originally the Anglo-Indian race came about because when the British were out there, because when the East Indian Company was running the whole thing there before the Crown took over, which then became what we know as the British Raj, they would actually pay Indian women and British men to have relationships and pay 5 rupees for each child that was born, because they felt that actually that kind of integration helped. So that's why they did that really. So they were half British, totally trusted by the British as far as they could be, but ended up kind of falling between the cracks really. So when it came to Indian independence, then they really, they had would always have had quite a different lifestyle after that, really.
So I suppose the question really is, how much did Brando know before the marriage? How much truth did he know about Anna?
Well, in my opinion, I think he absolutely knew that Joan O'Callaghan was her real name, because she travelled on that passport. She arrived in America, and the studio paid her wages in the name of Joan O'Callaghan, and he booked flights for her. So he must have known that was her real name. And from Brando, he has never said the real story of what he felt about that. He wrote a kind of memoir, autobiography, but didn't mention any of the women in his life anywhere throughout it. And absolutely hated the press. They would never have given an interview where he talked about his private life in that way. So there was a lot of stuff in the papers about how he was absolutely, horrified and humiliated and all of those things. But actually, it's hard to know whether that was really true, because he knew, as he knew lots of people who had different names in Hollywood. He also absolutely knew, I believe he knew that her real name was not Anna Kashfi, but he might have thought there was a lot more, to the Indian side than perhaps there was, and presumably he assumed that he thought her father was called Devi Kashfi and her mother was called Selma Ghosh, and she used the name. She eventually said that her stepfather was called William O'Callaghan, And so perhaps that was the story that he understood, and that she'd taken her stepfather's name. You know, all these years later, it's hard to work out exactly, but I don't think he was entirely shocked, you know, when the news broke. I don't think that was really the root of their problems. I think they had all sorts of other problems going alongside it.
But he was sort of infatuated with her, wasn't he? Because, I mean, that did increase a lot when Anna had TB as well, didn't it? That sort of really increased it, didn't it?
Yes, I think very much so. I think he fell for her, and she was an absolutely beautiful, beautiful woman. And I think very charming. Those are all the reports of her. And you know, she then became seriously ill with TB, and you know, there she was, captive in hospital for 9 months. And he came to see her, you know, whenever he, you know, he was obviously making films in Los Angeles, but then also travelling abroad. But whenever he was in Los Angeles, he would come to the hospital every night, and you know, was very, very infatuated with her, I think. And that it was during that time that he proposed to her originally.
So she wasn't a fantasist, she was just fault of the Hollywood system, was she, you think?
Yeah, I don't think she was a fantasist at all. I think she was caught up in a situation that was a kind of untenable situation, really, because the logic of it was she'd just given these false names, which were the names that the studio used for her parents. They were in her studio biography, you know, all the publicity that went out, and she'd given those on her marriage certificate. And then 2 weeks later, somebody comes forward and says that's not her real name. Well, you know, I think it would have been very difficult for her at that point to have said, oh yeah, actually I lied 2 weeks ago and these aren't. I mean, that was what the system was, and she was, I think she was quite badly served by the studio, because they kind of hung her out to dry a bit, really. And you know, you have to remember she was 23, quite naive.
Yeah.
There she was, really.
Well, it's a fascinating book. It's absolutely packed full of information, more information than we can cover today. It really is a good read. And that is Brando's Bride. And my after guest was Sarah Broughton. Thanks for spending the time this afternoon, Sarah.
Oh, no, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.